welcome back. So today we are going to talk about accomplishments, and the reason it matters is because the Romans accomplished great things in science, engineering, architecture, art, literature, and law.
I'm sorry. It's only one page. This is not a very long video lesson. It's page 13. It says accomplishments. It does not say lesson 2. It's just page 13 and it says accomplishments.
All right, guys, so let's talk about engineering. Okay, so the Romans developed new materials to help their structures last. So all of these grand, big buildings that we think of today with Rome, it started with them changing how they built these things. So the Romans created cement, which we're all very familiar with, and they created cement by mixing lime with volcanic ash and rock. Now, the Romans also created the arch. Okay, so we're all also very familiar with the arch, cultural diffusion, right? Because of its rounded shape, an arch can support much more weight than any of the other shapes can, or many of the other shapes. Last but not least, the photograph to the right, not above, shows a Roman aqueduct which has the arches, and it's able to hold that weight. An aqueduct is just a raised channel used to carry water from mountains into the cities. So when we talk about Rome, they're not necessarily one that we classify as a river valley civilization. So they have to create these arches that have the aqueducts, or the aqueduct that has the arch, to carry water from the mountain into the cities. Okay, so engineering was a huge thing that the Romans created and passed on. And they passed on those ideas to later civilizations such as the United States.
Okay, so now we will talk about why the Romans were famous for their roads. Roman roads were built in layers. These layers consisted of sand, concrete, rock, and stone. Drainage ditches let water run off, preventing water damage to them. The main purpose of the roads was to allow Rome's armies to travel quickly throughout the empire. As a matter of fact, they built so many roads, they built 50,000 miles of roads. That is enough to circle the earth twice. That is a lot of roads. They also built milestone markers, kind of like what we have on our highways. We see the signs that mark where we're at on the highway. They had their own milestone markers carved in stone. That's it for me. Bye.
All right, guys, so we want to talk Roman architecture. And Roman architecture is one of the best things about Rome, one of the lasting legacies that we can still see today. The Romans admired beauty, and they copied some older Greek designs. So if we look at these buildings, we can actually see this resembles buildings that we saw in Greece. And the architecture looks very similar to that. And by architecture, what we mean is building design, angles, columns, arches that we can see down here in the Colosseum, and different ways of building buildings and designing different buildings in town, the Capitol and all the other buildings that they had. So the Romans covered many of their buildings with marble, and we can't see all the marble anymore. A lot of the marble has been taken away, but some of it is still there. And so, well, actually quite a lot of it, when you talk about columns and things like that, that part's still there, but some of the facades and things that covered it are not. And the Roman buildings were made out of marble, very beautiful, very durable. Roman builders combined arches, which are right here in the Colosseum. You can see these arches, and vaults to create, combined arches to create vaults, a set of arches that support the roof of a building. And vaults were used to create huge open areas within buildings like the Colosseum. Okay, so here's how that works. You can see the arches here, and they're using these to make vaults to make it tall. And by using arches with hollowed out spaces, it alleviates some of the weight of the building, and it's not quite as heavy as it would be if all of that were filled in. So with these open spaces, it allows them to build taller and bigger buildings. But the arch is very, very strong and durable, and it can hold that weight because all the weight doesn't get pushed into one section. It gets distributed throughout the whole vault. So instead of all the weight being right here on top of an arch, it gets distributed on both sides and it's stronger that way. So that's Roman architecture. We'll look at a lot more pictures of that, and we'll see a lot more of the great buildings they created and how we can still see them today, and the influence that they have on the United States and our architecture.
So just beyond building and all of that, the Romans also made some great accomplishments in the area of science, language, and law. One of them you might have noticed when we were talking about Julius Caesar, and that was the fact that the Romans studied the stars to create a calendar. In fact, the calendar that we have today, our 12-month, 365-day calendar, is based off of the Roman calendar. In fact, the month July, that's after Julius Caesar, and August is after Augustus Caesar. And in the Roman calendar, the month October was the 8th month of the year, and December was the 10th month of the year. And you can see that looking at the roots of that language in Latin. Oct is 8, like an octagon has 8 sides. So those little bits and pieces of the Roman calendar system still play really heavily into ours. Cultural diffusion. We also have medicine and surgery. I want you to put a star by the name Galen here. He was a Greek surgeon, and remember, the Greeks were under Roman control during the Pax Romana, during that time of Roman peace. And he studied the body, and he was the first to describe the valves of the heart and noted the differences between the arteries and veins. Now, I know you guys have been talking about your body systems in language arts. So, science, not language arts. Sorry, I don't know why. Apparently, I thought language arts. Thank you, Miss Tickle. But if you guys can tell me which is which, do the arteries bring blood to or from your heart, and what do the veins do? Just write that in the margin over here, because I don't know. You tell me, and we'll get an extra sticker for you. We also see Latin, and we've talked about Latin before, but it was the language of government and law. And Latin later developed into many different languages that we call Romance languages. And we don't call them Romance because they're so sweet and beautiful and romantic. No, we call them Romance languages because they're named after the language of the Romans, okay? So these are languages like French, Spanish, Portuguese, English. English is a blend of Latin languages and Germanic languages as well. So all of these languages, if you know enough Latin, you can figure out a lot of Spanish and French and all of those sorts of different languages. So that's another example of cultural diffusion right down the line. Now, over time, we've talked about the 12 tables and such, and in fact, by this next one, we're going to write 12 tables. But Roman law inspired a system called civil law. And this is a legal system based on a written code of laws. So we're going to write 12 tables right over here. In my beautiful handwriting here. Isn't it great, guys? But this idea is super important. Today, we believe that you have to have a written constitution, a written form of laws, just like the 12 tables, in order for everyone to know about laws. And for it to be fair for everyone to have equal access to that. Now, next year in civics, you're going to learn a lot more about civil law, but this is another one that we need to put a big star by. All right, guys, that is the end of these video notes today. We will see you soon. Have a great long weekend. Bye. Okay.
It's recording now.
We're going to talk about Roman roads.